Hello, beautiful souls, and welcome. Today we are going to be talking about ancestors, ancestral trauma, and ancestral karma, and ancestor worship, and how to go about that if you have a family that you don't necessarily resonate with anymore, or that you maybe never knew or never resonated with. So if you are new here, welcome. My name is Danielle, #Damcl at D's Enlightened Edits of damcldesigns.com. I am a spiritual advisor, quantum channel, and energy healer and reader, as well as energy artist. I have been working as a psychic medium and more for well over a decade, and studying metaphysics all of my life, and in fact, to me, for many lifetimes. And in these chat and channel sessions, we go about the process of having a topic presented to me by my guides, or in some cases, some of you, and having a stream of consciousness channeling on it. So before we really dive in, I invite you to get out a journal or perhaps open up your notes app on your phone or favorite device, and if you feel so inclined, do some stream of consciousness writing along with me, because there are vocal light codes in the transmission of my voice. And so for those of you who'd like to and who would like to tap into getting your own information, the invitation is there, and more information should be made available to you as you go about stream of consciousness writing of your own. With that being said, I also want to encourage you to stick around for the full channeling session if you can, or bookmark it and be sure to come back, because you are not going to want to miss that later on in the session we're going to be going through a transmissional process to help you transmute some of your ancestral karma. So you may want to take that down in your notes as we go through, or bookmark that section and come back to it when you are ready to perform that prayer or ritual for yourself. And I also want to take a note to say, on the day that I am posting this, it is All Souls Day, or Dia de los Muertos. So blessed All Souls Day or Dia de los Muertos to you if you are watching on that day in the year that I am posting or not. This is going to be a timeless video, so we are going to be talking about topics well beyond this holiday, but the holiday is what sparked me to post this video today. So wishing all of you who are watching in that time frame a blessed day to you and to all the souls in your life. Today is a day in Catholicism and Christian traditions where our souls are celebrated more somberly, and in prayers and in kind of solemn at times remembrance. In Dia de los Muertos tradition, however, these souls are celebrated with enthusiasm and exuberance and joy, and it is a day when many cultures throughout the world on this day or on other similar days invite the spirits of their loved ones or ancestors back into their life through celebrations, through honorings and altars, etc. If you are not familiar, I am sure that you can find a lot more information on this subject and on this holiday. In fact, the energy art that you are seeing if you are watching the video version of this podcast is my Ancestral Lemonade energy art collection, which you can find on my website, damcldesigns.com. It is a piece of energy art that you can see contains a decorated skull and flowers and butterflies and food and drink and lemons turning into lemonade. So if you would like to work with that energy art, you can find it on some Enlightened merch products on my website. But that is actually going to take us to our main topic of the video today, which is ancestral trauma and ancestral karma, and how we can go about these processes of honoring ancestors in a way that feels good for us, especially if we are people who maybe never knew our family or cannot find information about our ancestors, or know information about them but don't really quite resonate anymore. So let's first jump into talking about ancestral trauma. Ancestral trauma is something that, of course, spiritual people have known about for a very, very long time. However, in the scientific communities and the psychiatry communities, ancestral trauma is becoming more well known and more well researched. Now, between metaphysical and scientific studies, the best we can tell at the time of this recording is that ancestral trauma can be something carried by the body stemming back at least 13 generations, which I find very interesting, 13 being a sacred number in a lot of numerology practice and especially in practices of goddess worship. 13 in our ancestors' past was also said to be a lucky number before it was transformed into said to be unlucky by the church after some events with the Knights Templar. So you may want to look into that story if you find mysteries as intriguing as I do. But anyway, it is said that ancestral trauma and the pain and the hardship and the ways of these genes being turned on and off in epigenetics cued by trauma can stem back to experiences from our past 12 to 13 ancestors minimum. So that means everything experienced at least 13 times back can be carried and stored in your body to a certain extent. And it would only take you being either psychically attuned to certain things or having other environmental triggers in your life cue these things for that trauma or those genes associated with that trauma to be turned on and for you to experience it at a certain level. This is why things like depression or anxiety can be pre-genetically exposed. Now, just a disclaimer here, always read the disclaimer in my video description. I am not a doctor or an accredited scientist. I am someone who has done a lot of my own study and research and encourage you to do the same as well. And I hope that you will use my work as cues to do research of your own. But epigenetics is really fascinating. It is something that has gotten, unfortunately, taken over by a lot of negative forces throughout our recent past and recent history as this information has become more studied and well known. For example, the Nazis were well known to look into and try to discriminate or harm or experiment based on epigenetics. And in fact, in America, where I am from, there is also a history of scientists and doctors utilizing and discriminating with epigenetic science, even as far up until the 1960s, 70s, as far as my research has taken me to this point. So for my mystery inclined folks, that is another rabbit hole for you to go down if and when you want and choose to. But there are positive ways to look at and understand the science of epigenetics. Now, epigenetics means that based on internal or external triggers, certain genes can turn on and off. Now, personally, I do not believe in junk DNA. I believe it has been labeled that by scientists who are not yet ready to understand or dive into the places where metaphysics and spirituality meet science and actual medical knowledge. But there is more and more evidence in traditional science fields now stating how environmental cues and nurture and nature can turn certain genes on and off. So this is what I was saying, how things like anxiety and depression can be pre-genetically disposed, but they can seem to skip generations or skip certain people in the family. Now, that would be because of how those people in the family deal with their internal or external environmental triggers. Because remember, even if there are a set of identical twins going through identical circumstances and identical nurture as well as nature, everyone's nervous system is going to be unique, even more unique than a fingerprint. And so how everyone deals with and understands and processes the traumas or happenings in their life is going to determine whether something is processed in the body, in the genes, in the mind, and even in the soul as a trauma, as a positive, or as a negative. And these things can go even as far as turning certain gene triggers on and off, which is why certain people in the family may get sick or ill, whether it is something of mental health capacity family, or something of a physical ailment or an autoimmune disorder, right? A lot of people who have ancestral trauma have autoimmune disorders that run in the family. And in my experience, usually the sensitive souls and or the awakened souls are the ones who have these autoimmune triggers and genes turned on, especially as you go through the awakening process, as you become more sensitive to the chemicals and the changing environment around us, or if you are an empath who is attuned to understanding and picking up on energies in and all around you. Now, you can be picking up on a chaotic field around you in your upbringing, or you can be picking up on chaos or turmoil or pain or unfinished business of your ancestors who may be carrying some of that and hanging around to a certain extent, whether that is here in a spiritual form close to the physical plane, or whether that is in things that they passed on and passed down into the way that the body transposed these memories. And it becomes up to the spiritually awakened or enlightening people or empathic people in many cases to transmute this. Now, this is where we step into ancestral karma. Ancestral trauma can be more attuned to medical things and how the body carries out health and processes. This is where we have the understanding that certain people's ancestors who survived famine, their descendants may be predisposed to maybe carry certain weight or not let go of weight even when they're not eating a lot until they train their body differently, right? So that's how we carry and process ancestral trauma. This, by the way, may also make us predisposed to have things like PTSD or CPTSD or carry and process traumas of our own in a similar way until we transmute and dissociate from the ways that our ancestors have processed trauma in the past. Now, again, this is where we step into the ancestral karma bit, because it becomes up to us as light workers, as consciousness raisers or understanders or expanders, however you want to associate or label yourself, people who are very often known as the black sheep in their family or who do a lot of research into these things. We are often the ones who pick up on this need to transmute such ancestral traumas and karmas and end the cycles that have been passed on for so long. This, by the way, can also be in doing things like stopping the cycle of emotional abuse or emotional unavailability and the patterns that have gone on in a family that we are consciously aware of. But it can also be in terms of how we work with our soul as well as our body and the blood and DNA that we carry to transmute the karma of the people that have come before us. Now, this is going to be a different process for everyone, and how much of this you take on is going to be up to you and your soul. I want you to know and to be aware of the fact that you can change this agreement, even if it has become your destiny. You can change this agreement and entropy at any time through an Akashic Records or soul contract changing process. This is something that I wish I knew a lot earlier in my journey. This is something that a lot of people feel guilty about, changing this transmutation process or agreement, because we feel like, well, if we don't do it, who will do it? And so often we take on too much, or we feel such a burden from our families, whether we are in touch with them or not, because we see how much the other people in our family are not necessarily taking steps or utilizing tools to end these cycles or these karmas, or to transmute anything, or to do more research into the ailments that may be affecting them. To that, I want to say, please remember that everyone's journey is their own. Everyone needs to, of their free will, consent to an experience in which they choose to do this deep and sometimes difficult work of transmuting energy, transmuting karma, transmuting trauma. And quite simply, not everyone is at a stage in their evolution where they are capable of doing that or are willing to do that. So although it may hurt to see people that we love choose not to do this work, and it may hurt us to feel like we carry the burden and everybody else kind of drops the ball, or most of the other family members drop the ball, we need to be able to release that and set healthy boundaries, and also boundaries with our expectations of others. If we can, we need to be able to drop the expectations, let them be who they are meant to or want to and choose to be, and then we decide who we want to be, how much of this we want to take on. I understand so many of us as light workers feel a great responsibility to stop and end and change and transmute and rise above these cycles. However, it is a lot of work, and sometimes, especially before we really step into the process of understanding that we have a choice in the matter, sometimes our bodies really take on the burden of responsibility for and with us. And this is where we have the phenomena of many light workers becoming sick, manifesting physical ailments, having those things turn the genes on for physical ailments, and then not necessarily being able to work through that sickness, overcome or cure it completely, or end the cycle by way of being well. And, some people pass away in this transmutation process with the sickness sometimes taking their life. Now, that again is going to be a soul contract for those people. Some people may choose to die in that way or similar way. However, it is possible for us to recognize these patterns, recognize these cycles, recognize the roots of where diseases may be coming from and what they may be trying to teach us, or how our body may be unconsciously trying to help us transmute by way of manifesting a sickness to get our attention on these things in order to transmute them. And then work with the body and the soul as well as the awareness in order to transmute, so that the body doesn't have to carry the burden for us, and we can go about the process of turning on wellness genes rather than illness genes. Now, again, this is still a very new field. It is still being researched. It is something that I am continuously learning about. And if you are interested, I encourage you to also always find a doctor or a medical practitioner or team who is accredited and experienced in science and has access to labs and things to help you work through these processes if you or a loved one are facing a current illness. Of course, it is easier to work with this process and these teams if you can be open with your medical practitioners and tell them about your beliefs and tell them about your research. Some people, believe it or not, and some doctors and medical practitioners are of this belief as well and are willing to work with spirituality hand in hand with science. So please do not give up hope and do the work to find the doctors or medical practitioners that are out there for you or a loved one and will not make you feel silly or foolish for believing the things that you do. Not that you are under any obligation to believe this, obviously, but this is just all in my experience. Now, personally, since a little girl, have suffered through a lot of ailments, illnesses, autoimmunes, etc. And I've been able to link a lot of these things either to a spiritual lesson, to an ancestral trauma or karma, or, to a pattern on my soul as well. So that is something to remember, that some things may be coming from our ancestors and the things that our body carries and the ways that we have agreed to be here to transmute things for the DNA that we have agreed to be part of in this physical current incarnation. And some things are transmuting from our soul. Now, our soul need not necessarily have always been a part of this ancestral line. Matter of fact, I know the other lines that I have been a part of for the most part, and for, a lot of my Akashic Records research and memories that I had coming in. And I know that I have not realistically been part of this ancestral line many times. times. And so I've always been able to clearly differentiate and see the difference between what's coming from my DNA patterns and what is coming from my souls. But sometimes it's still a little bit muddled, and sometimes it's coming from both. So I encourage you to be willing to explore and do that work of, using discernment and seeing whether something that you may be struggling with or something that is threatened or a fear for you, if it has been a pattern in life, is coming from your ancestral line and epigenetics ability to turn that on and off, or is perhaps manifesting from your personal soul line and karma. If that is something that you need help with, you can utilize the links in the video description to contact me or visit my website, damcldesigns.com. I do quantum and Akashic records, readings, and sessions individually, and there is also a link to contact me for a consult to see if we are a good fit for me to build you one of my custom quantum, Sikhem, and shamanic energy healing containers or life and consciousness coaching packages. Those are done and assessed on an individual basis to see if we're a good fit and to see what your soul may need at this time and going forward. Now, once you do that work, whether it is with me or someone else or on your own in your own channelings or divination practices, and find whether something is coming from you or from an ancestor, if it is coming from you, you want to dive into the roots of that. Are there roots from your inner childhood wounds? Are there roots from past lives that you may or may not remember? If it is coming from your ancestral line, it is recommended to try to locate that ancestor. Now, this doesn't have to be a complete process of finding their name, finding their time period, finding their picture. It can be, and obviously for some people that's easier or more desired. But it doesn't, you don't have to have all that information. It doesn't need to be that complicated. If you can find the impression that may still be vibrating in your resonance and in your soul's resonance, in my experience, that is enough, because what you want to do is go about the process of transmuting that energy and saying, with compassion, I understand that you, such and such ancestor, went through that experience. I am so sorry that you went through that experience. Say it with as much energy and heart-based energy and enthusiasm as you can. The Ho'oponopono may be a practice that you wish to utilize with these ancestors and healing that thing, whatever it is for you. But I also want to note that it is perfectly acceptable to have boundaries with ancestors. A lot of people have difficult ancestors. Sometimes we have ancestors who disagree with us and our soul or our lifestyle, or ancestors that really, really did a lot of harm to others. And if we want to go about this practice of transmuting the karma, the first thing that I want you to realize is that their wrongdoings are not your wrongdoings. You are not responsible for their actions or for their energy. And so it becomes a process of disentangling and dissociating their responsibility from the things that you carry in your body, so that you don't have any of these things acting as spiritual magnets to you and your experience or your perceptive lens anymore. I personally have had ancestors that greatly disagree with me being in touch and being able to see them, ancestors that disagree with me being LGBTQ. It does happen, and people don't really talk about that in terms of ancestral worship, because it is so accepted and well known that you should be really appreciative of your ancestors. And while yes, it is always good to be appreciative and be appreciative that they survived in order to get you here, there can be a difference between being appreciative for that and not necessarily agreeing with their choices or who they were. You can be thankful that you are here with more awareness to make different choices, possibly with more empowerment or more awakened abilities, and simultaneously recognize them for the limits that they had and the good that they were able to do. Because, no matter how horrible of deeds they may have taken, every person has good and bad in their life for the most part. Even the most monstrous people have moments of creativity or some moments of light or good. There are very few lives that have been allowed to happen on this planet, or even in mythology, where it's been strictly light or strictly dark. For the most part, we're all a mixed bag. So if we could take on that perspective, and if we can be willing to work with and recognize ancestors with boundaries first and foremost, this is something I wish I knew way earlier in my journey. You need boundaries with the dead as well as with the living. I was constantly drained, especially when I was just quote unquote a spirit medium. I was constantly drained and either attacked or bombarded by spirit because I had no boundaries. I was raised to not have boundaries. I was raised with people who refused to understand or research boundaries and just weren't ready in their journey to understand, respect, or utilize boundaries. And so that permeated everything in my life, all of my relationships, as well as my relationships with the dead and with deity and with energies and entities of all kinds. So if you are a light worker or anyone with forms of intuition or empathy or ability to see or feel or hear or smell into other worlds, any of your clairs will do. I encourage you, if you've not been raised with boundaries, or if boundaries are an issue for you that you can recognize with living people, start to look at the ways boundaries may be an issue for you in working with the dead, because once you make that change, your life and your health, in my experience, gets a whole lot easier. And this is where I also want to mention that if you have had a lot of trauma in your family, especially if you have had a lot of betrayal in the family that you know or remember, or abuse, it may not necessarily be your best route at this time to work with ancestors, especially in the traditionally accepted ways. Of course, I love and admire and appreciate those ways and the cultures that carry on those traditions. However, I think a lot of them are passed down in a rigidness, which is not necessarily inclusive to the light workers that have really come here to turn the tide and to stop these cycles of ancestral karma and trauma and patterns. While it is admirable if you can work through that and then come to an honoring of your ancestors in those celebratory and loving and compassionate ways, I also want the rest of you to be generous and compassionate and understanding with yourselves if you have moments in your journey or holidays or years in your lifetime where you just don't feel like doing that, even if it's the publicly accepted spiritual thing. I have had moments where it's really not been comfortable for me to work with ancestors. I still have moments like that because I've been someone that's really been blessed, but also sometimes it feels cursed to see into all these patterns and to realize the negative ways that they've affected me and other family members have as well, who've maybe perpetuated them but not been ready to recognize, stop, or make amends for them. And so that's been a part of my healing journey, to be able to set boundaries with people if they're just not in a place in their life to understand me or respect me or participate in my life in a way that feels good for me and them. And so I want to encourage you in that, if that is something that you are struggling with living family members or with passed over family members, because sometimes a family member will pass over and they will have maybe betrayed us or abused us or left us with a lot of unfinished business. And we need to go about our healing process first before we can really step into that role and that ability to understand and view them with compassion, to forgive them if that is our path, or to apologize to them, possibly if we were the ones in doing wrong. So be gentle with yourself in your healing journey. Know that that is a part of the transmutation process as well. And also be willing to go about this process of never being afraid to rewrite or end soul contracts. Now, for example, I have ended soul contracts with family members living and dead, who I know the karma is done, and I do not wish to incur any further karma by interacting with them when they are not ready to live in a way which does not incur more karma, if that is a living person. If it is a passed over person or an ancestor, you can end karmic and soul contracts consciously by saying, I recognize that you went through that. I recognize that was a hardship. Perhaps you are drawn to make amends in some way on behalf of that person or that experience in a way that is possible for you to do here in the physical world to finish up the carrying out of that karma. But remember that once you become consciously aware of these things, you can choose how that karmic entropy can go to a large part in certain extent. Some things are a little bit beyond our current ability or understanding. However, anything is possible. But when you go about this process of consciously determining how that will go, you can, let's say, if you have ancestors who were part of the Americas for an extended amount of time and were here during slavery maybe, and then you find out that they were slave owners, you can do something consciously to alleviate that, or perhaps spiritually, or make an offering to make amends to the spirits of those that your ancestors may have harmed. And be sure to differentiate yourself from those ancestors. In other words, if you are making an offering to people that your family may have harmed, it is important that you not place the responsibility of those actions on yourself. However, you recognize and step into the place of saying, I recognize that I carry the blood of a person or the DNA of a person who harmed you. Let's say if you are speaking to indigenous or African souls that may have been harmed by your ancestors. I recognize that I have been part of a line that may have harmed you or done a disservice to you or disrespected you. Please recognize that I am a different soul. I do not take responsibility for the actions of my ancestors or my loved ones if you actually knew and loved them. However, I want you to recognize that I recognize that was wrong. I am so sorry for the experiences that you went through and any of the experiences or hardships that you may have gone through as a result of the actions of my ancestors. Please know that I am a different soul, and I wish and mean you no harm. And in fact, I stand here now before you because you may be calling on their souls, or in this place that may have been harmful to you if you are drawn to take a trip to those locations. And I stand here before you calling upon Great Spirit, higher power, positive energy, love and light, whatever you are called to say, and asking nothing but the best for you and your descendants. I wish to end this soul contract now and heal and clear and transmute and rise above our karma. I release you, I release myself, and I release the ancestor who has done harm, and I ask for nothing but the best of blessings and love, light, health, wealth, healing, joy, empowerment to come into its place. And you can imagine a beautiful ball of white or golden light or rainbow light perhaps now coming down and transmuting and washing over you and perhaps the souls or energies or land that you are making amends to, and releasing bonds or chains that have been linked between you or that place and the ancestor and those who may have been harmed from that experience. So that is a mini transmission that wanted to come through there. Feel free to bookmark this and come back to it and replay it and work through it again anytime that you feel like you are being called to end such soul contracts. As I said during the transmission, sometimes you will be called to do this in a physical location or maybe in a place where you have called forth the energy of those souls, Or perhaps maybe you do it with our participating party, another participating party who is a willing participant. In any event, I encourage you to do some protections before you do this maneuver, and to not necessarily do it in a place where you want to be at rest. In other words, I wouldn't really recommend doing this in your bedroom or a sacred space to you. I would really recommend, if possible, doing this outside so that spirit and energies recognize that you're not necessarily inviting them into your home. Even if you do that just outside your home and in your yard, and even though you are going to be going about the process at the end of making releasement, it's just safer, in my opinion, to do it outside of the physical dwelling. Now, you can, by the way, also do this to release karma from your ancestral dwelling or from your home. However, I would still do that from outside, and you can maybe place a hand on the building if you like, just so that energies know that you are not inviting them into the home necessarily, and are perhaps maybe calling them out of the home and attachment to the home. So I hope, beautiful soul, that that has been helpful to you in your soul workings. I know that I did also say we are going to talk about the process of honoring ancestors, when you're uncomfortable. I think we've pretty well gone over the fact that you don't necessarily have to do that. And I'm also really proud that you have been here with me to address the fact that we should have boundaries and understanding with ourselves as well for the times that we do not feel like doing that. In terms of how you should worship or honor ancestors, if you are someone who has gone through a lot of trauma, or if you recognize that there's a lot of trauma and you don't necessarily want to associate with all of that, I can't really give you a definitive guide, because that's going to be a unique process to you and your nervous system in terms of what you are ready for and what you're comfortable with. And in fact, even if I gave you a guide, you would have to play trial and error with it anyway to see how it feels. In most cases, people are very comfortable doing things like lighting candles to honor people, or lighting incense to honor ancestors. Now, you can do this with a prerequisite that says blessings and appreciations onto the ancestors who love and respect me. I love and respect thee and wish you nothing but the best across all space-time reality, karma-free, this and better, and so it is, blessed be. That is a little incantation or prayer or manda, if you prefer, that I like to use and say so that I'm not actually calling back connection with ancestors who I may have transmuted or may not wish to associate with. Because remember, it is not necessarily up to you to carry that burden of transmuting everything for your family line. Now, I know that we don't want to pass any of this on to our descendants, and it is honorable and admirable if we want to be those people that end all of the patterns and traumas and karmas and cycles, that may be being passed down through the body. However, it's just unrealistic, in my opinion. The same way as when I do past life and Akashic Records readings for people, we're not going to read your entire Akashic Record and your entire past life history, because those can be thousands-fold or more, and it would be too overwhelming to your soul. Spirit brings forth the lifetimes and the lives and the lessons, as well as the karmas that your soul is ready to understand, participate in, heal, transmute, and rise above, whatever you like to say, when and as you are ready for them. So please do your best. I know it's easier said than done, but do your best to trust the process, that the things that you are called to transmute, stop carrying, or release yourself from the obligation of carrying are purposeful, and the unfoldment of those things is also purposeful. The fact that you have come here with the perception and the recognition to try at least to understand these things that have lain dormant or have been unwilling to be recognized by so many for so long is admirable in itself. So sometimes we are maybe just the person in the line that is meant to recognize and can start the work on ending a pattern or karma, but not necessarily the person who will have all of the tools, energies, capabilities to completely transmute or end that thing. And you know what? That's okay. Sometimes our children will be able to pick up the ball in a way where it's not quite as heavy for them, it's not a burden for them, and they understand that they can do that with help. And I know that that's scary to think of passing not quite positive things onto our children, but remember that if we are doing so, we are doing so with more awareness, with more understanding, with boundaries, and with more abilities than ever before. And that in itself is a blessing. Sometimes as you go through your journey, you will also find that some people in the family that were not awakened or were not willing to look into these things or heal themselves or do this work will awaken at a later point. And those things that you were pushing to try to end or transmute or heal that just were not ending and were too burdensome for you or were making you ill were things that were actually waiting on a process of you maybe working with someone else in the family to do them as well. Now, this can be a peer or this can be a relative or an ancestor who steps forward for you at a later time that you never expected. So please be willing to put down those burdens as and when you are called. If something is too heavy, if you don't easily have access to the tools or understandings or open doors or windows to actually end or heal or transmute those things, it may be a sign that it's time to lay that burden back at the feet or on the altar of higher power and say, you know what, I'm going to readjust my soul contract. I'm going to say this is not necessarily for me to transmute at this time. And higher power, if it is meant for me, please show me the ways in which it's meant for me to do so and make them easily available. If it's not meant for me to do at this time, please take away the effects and entropies which are bringing me harm, and please bring about the time and ways in which they can be solved most easily for me and my family. So those are really things that I recommend. And again, I encourage you to maybe pause this or listen again and take some notes with these processes, bookmark places in this channeling that are helpful to you so that as you go about the process of this work, because it is an unfoldment process and most likely you'll go through cycles and spirals with it on different issues, you can come back here and have the tools and have the support as well of listening to this like a pep talk as you are going through that experience. So with that, beautiful soul, I'm going to invite you, if you are so called and have the time to do so now, or perhaps on a later listening, to do more of your own meditation or prayer or stream of consciousness channeling or work, and close the session out for you in that way. Of course, if you like and are called and are able, you can also jump right into doing something that will honor the ancestors as well as yourself. Please always remember to honor yourself as well as your loved ones in spirit. Now, in my experience, the ancestral worship practices of, leaving food or offerings, those are things that go back many, many eons and many, many cultures. I have memories of doing that even in the tombs of Egypt. And there are so many cultures who do these practices throughout the world. And I do not disregard them or in any way dissuade you from participating in those practices. However, I know, speaking purely for myself, I felt so guilty during the times when I was really going through my trauma and recognized these things, or being or feeling burdened by the weight of these things or how they were manifesting in my body as sickness, and just did not feel like performing worship or appreciation in those moments. Now, while some people will say, oh no, those are the moments that you really should do the appreciation and worship and ask those loved ones to take it from you, maybe, but we don't don't all always have the feeling or the permission to do that, especially if we are in deep trauma. So if you have been carrying a lot of trauma, if you have been struggling with sickness or misunderstanding of your loved ones, or if you never knew who your loved ones were and you go about this process, perhaps you were adopted or just information's not easily available to you, and you go about this process of understanding where the vibrations of those things come from, maybe never being able to associate them with a face or a name, I want you to understand that it is okay for you to find a way to practice or worship or not in the ways that are honorable to you as well as to those spirits. And it is perfectly acceptable to end or set boundaries with relationships once they are no longer healthy for you. However, in my experience, it is also best if and when we are able to recognize them, so that those things no longer have to play out in the subconscious, the unconscious, or behind the scenes in sickness. And we bring them to the forefront of recognition so that our bodies or our souls or our mentalities no longer are running that same track of trying to transmute them for us before we have that consciousness go to the recognition factor. So with that, I really am going to close out this chat and channel session. I invite you, as I said, if you are called and drawn and able to look at the links in the video description for my website, damcldesigns.com, if you are interested in doing this or any other form of spiritual working or reading or energy healing with me. You will find those links. You will also find the links to some of my energy art and enlightened merch products, which are other ways that I express my gifts, such as this Ancestral lemonade collection, which you can see some of the art for there in the back if you are watching this on video. I have been in the process for several years of turning my ancestral karma or lemons into lemonade, and I wish you nothing but the best in doing that for you as well, and hopefully you will get to experience the blessings too, because remember that although our first inclination usually is to go to the problems and the things that need transmuting or healing, I promise you, if you look and you are able and willing to switch perspective, you will also find that there are ancestors in spirit, even if no one's ever spoken about them before, who resonate with you and your gifts as well and have blessings to behold upon you. So please, I encourage you to look into that process as well of asking for and allowing yourself to receive blessings and not only focusing on the hardships or the sicknesses or the ailments or the karmas or traumas that may have been passed along. And if you look, even if it's just one person and whoever far back, and if you ever can verify them or not, I know that there will be blessed ancestors who are willing to bless you as well. I encourage you, if you're going to have communication or invitation or invocation with these or any other spirits or energies, of course have boundaries as we discussed, but if you're going to have communication, please always triple check that beings and spirits that you are working with are of the light and of unconditional love. Ask them that 3 times. They need to be able to answer the same way 3 times to make sure that they are who they say they are and you are not possibly being tricked by any energies. Please don't take things for granted based on how they look or say they are the first time. I want everyone to be safe in their spiritual practice, and I know that a lot of newer individuals or people who are gifted for quite an extended period of time but have not been in this practice of checking will be new to that practice, but especially as we are moving through the Kali Yuga, in my experience, there are a lot of trickster energies out there at times, and I want everyone to work with who they want to work with. So I wish you love and luck with that. Good luck, of course, because there's good and bad luck. So I wish you good luck with that. If this video and this podcast or channeling has helped you, please remember to like it so that the algorithm knows to spread it to others in the communities who may like and benefit from it as well. Thank you so much for those of you who do that. Feel free to make sure you are subscribed if you resonate with myself and my energy and my works, so that you can tune into other chat and channel sessions. Turn the bell on to be alerted for future uploads in terms of this and other spiritual and fun materials that I present here on my channel. In the description, you will also find a link to tune into other chat and channel sessions, other goodies, and more. And if you are called and drawn and able, and my works and my channels have been helpful to you, I also accept all amounts appreciated energy exchange and donations through the links in which you will find in the description as well, or via paypal.me/DSEnlightenedEdits. Those are not requirements to participate with the energy. However, they are really helpful to keep my free and public works such as this open and going and flowing. And I appreciate all of you who do that, all of you who are subscribed, and those of you who participate in none of that, perhaps never work with me, but have listened to this and have interacted with it and can be blessed by it in any ways that you are able to be blessed going forward. I wish you and your souls and ancestors and those in your life nothing but the best. Be blessed with love, light, and light codes. Love, Danielle. #Damcl at DSEnlightenedEdits of damcldesigns.com.